They laughed because he didn't set answer. They pushed harder because they expected rage. Insults were thrown openly. Cameras were rolling, and everyone waited for Muhammad Ali to strike back with words sharper than his fists. But Ali did something no one could understand in that moment. He stayed silent, not out of fear, not out of defeat, out of control. That quiet choice, made while others mocked him, would sit in their minds for years. And long after the noise faded, the people who insulted him would realize that his silence carried more weight than any response, and it changed how they measured strength, dignity, and what it truly means to win. The room carried a strange tension, the kind that settles when people are waiting for a spectacle. Every eye was fixed on Muhammad Ali, not with curiosity, but with anticipation. They had already decided how this moment should end. In their minds, it would be loud, sharp, and explosive. Ali's reputation had taught them to expect fire. What they wanted wasn't truth, but reaction. The insult didn't come softly. It was delivered with confidence, meant to land in front of witnesses. Laughter followed almost immediately, the kind that assumes victory before the battle begins. The atmosphere suggested that Ali was cornered, verbally trapped, with nowhere to move except forward. Everyone leaned in, expecting him to strike back. Ali heard every word. None of it was unclear. None of it was accidental. He understood exactly what they were trying to do, and why they were doing it. This wasn't about disagreement. It was about provocation. They wanted him emotional, impulsive, predictable. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind. Seconds stretched longer than they should have. The crowd began to shift, unsure if the response was coming late or not at all. That pause alone unsettled people more than any argument could have. Ali remained still. His posture didn't change. His face showed no sign of internal struggle. There was no clenched jaw, no forced smile, no visible restraint. He looked present, grounded, and unbothered in a way that confused everyone watching. That calm disrupted the script they had written for him. They had prepared for noise, not quiet. They had planned to feed off his anger, not his composure. In refusing to react, Ali took control of the moment without saying a single word. Some mistook his silence for weakness. Whispers moved quickly through the room. A few people assumed the insult must have hurt more than expected. Others believed age, pressure, or fatigue had finally dulled his edge. They were wrong, but they didn't know it yet. Ali had learned something most people never master. He knew that reacting instantly gives power away. The moment you answer on someone else's terms, you surrender control. By choosing stillness, he kept ownership of himself. The cameras kept rolling, waiting for something dramatic to justify their presence. But there was nothing to capture except a man refusing to be pulled down. That refusal was invisible to some, but unmistakable to others. It separated observers from thinkers. Inside that silence was a decision, not made out of fear but clarity. Ali wasn't calculating how to win an argument. He was deciding what kind of man he would be remembered as. He understood that moments like this outlive headlines. The people who insulted him began to feel exposed, without a reaction to point to. Their words stood alone, naked, unsupported. There was no exchange to balance the scale, no mutual hostility to justify what had been said. The laughter started to fade, replaced by uncertainty. Silence has a way of forcing people to sit with their own actions. It removes distraction and leaves only intention. That discomfort began settling in. Ali's restraint shifted the power dynamic completely. The insult had been loud, but it was now shrinking. His quiet, on the other hand, was growing heavier by the second. The room felt different because he refused to play his assigned role. This wasn't the silence of surrender. It was the silence of someone who knew his worth, didn't need defending. Ali had already fought too many battles to waste energy on one designed to diminish him. In that moment, strength stopped looking like dominance. It started to look like discipline. People watching didn't realize it yet, but they were witnessing a lesson, not a confrontation, one that would return to them later. The absence of response created space for reflection. Some felt uneasy without knowing why. Others dismissed the moment entirely, eager to move on, but the seed had already been planted. Ali stood as proof that dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It simply exists, steady and immovable, even when tested publicly. That decision not to explode required more control than anger ever could. Anger would have been easy. Silence demanded strength, the kind that comes from deep self-awareness. Long after the moment ended, people would replay it in their minds, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The unanswered insult became a question they couldn't ignore. Ali walked away unchanged, but those who expected fireworks carried something new with them: confusion, reflection, a quiet discomfort they couldn't explain. What they thought would be a moment of humiliation became a moment of exposure, not for Ali but for everyone else. His restraint rewrote the story without a single line of dialogue. And without lifting his voice, Muhammad Ali showed that the most powerful response isn't always a response at all. Public humiliation is designed to strip a person of control. It puts pressure on the moment, the crowd, the cameras, and the ego all at once. Muhammad Ali understood that when disrespect is made public, it is rarely about truth. It is about forcing a reaction. The louder the setting, the stronger the temptation to defend yourself immediately. Ali saw that trap clearly. He knew the insult wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated to corner him emotionally. The timing, the audience, and the tone were all chosen to provoke anger. Responding in that moment would have meant stepping into a story written by someone else. Ali had spent his life refusing to let others define him, and he wasn't about to start then. Control for Ali was never about suppressing emotion. It was about directing it. He understood that anger released carelessly becomes a weapon against the person who holds it. By choosing restraint, he kept ownership of his dignity. That decision protected something deeper than reputation. Ali had lived long enough under scrutiny to know how narratives are shaped. The moment he reacted emotionally, the focus would shift from the insult to his response. The humiliation would disappear, and his anger would become the headline. Silence prevented that shift. There was also awareness in his stillness. Ali knew millions were watching, even if they weren't physically present. He understood that his response would teach something, whether he intended it or not. Control in that moment became a lesson, rather than a defense. Public humiliation often invites you to prove your strength outwardly. Ali chose to prove it inwardly. He didn't need to show dominance because he already knew who he was. That certainty removed the urgency to react. The pressure to respond was intense. Every instinct trained by years of confrontation urged him to strike back verbally, but Ali had matured beyond instinct. He had learned that mastery begins where impulse ends. By staying calm, he denied the insult the power it was meant to carry. Words only gain weight when they are answered. Silence let them fall flat, unsupported by conflict. That quiet refusal changed the energy of the room. Those watching mistook control for passivity. They assumed strength must always announce itself. Ali let them misunderstand. He was comfortable being misread in the moment because he trusted time to clarify the truth. Ali's restraint was also rooted in self-respect. He refused to lower himself to a space that didn't align with his values. Responding would have meant accepting the terms of humiliation. Silence rejected those terms entirely. Humiliation tries to force urgency. It pressures you to act before you think. Ali slowed the moment down. That pause alone disrupted the plan meant to provoke him. Stillness became a form of resistance. There was wisdom in understanding that not every battle deserves engagement. Ali recognized that reacting would not elevate the situation, it would only prolong it. Control allowed the moment to end without escalation. He also understood something deeply human. People often reveal more about themselves through insults than about their target. By not responding, Ali allowed that truth to stand on its own. No clarification was necessary. Control gave Ali the upper hand without aggression. He didn't dominate the exchange, he dissolved it. That dissolution left others uncomfortable because they had nowhere to redirect the tension they created. Public humiliation feeds on attention. Silence starves it. Ali's restraint removed the fuel from the fire. What was meant to burn brightly faded quickly without resistance. Ali had learned that strength does not always need witnesses. Some of the most powerful decisions happen internally. That moment wasn't for the crowd. It was for his own integrity. He chose control because he valued long-term respect over short-term satisfaction. A sharp reply might have felt good in the moment, but it would not have endured. Restraint would. The calm he displayed wasn't emotional detachment. It was emotional intelligence. He felt the insult, but he refused to be driven by it. That distinction mattered. Ali's control also protected his legacy. He understood that people remember how you handle pressure more than what pressured you. Silence preserved the memory he wanted to leave behind. By choosing restraint publicly, he modeled a different kind of power, one that doesn't need to overpower others to exist, one that stands firm without noise. Ali's control wasn't about winning the moment. It was about refusing to lose himself, and that choice transformed public humiliation into a private victory that only grew stronger with time. The silence didn't announce itself at first. It arrived quietly, slipping into the space where laughter had been. People assumed the moment was finished, that nothing meaningful had occurred. No argument meant no aftermath, but silence has a way of settling deeper than words ever can. The insult had been loud, sharp, and confident. It carried the energy of certainty, the kind that expects immediate resistance. When none came, it created a vacuum. That absence lingered, unanswered, unresolved. Silence doesn't close moments. It leaves them open. At first, those who mocked Ali felt victorious. They walked away believing they had controlled the exchange. Without resistance, they assumed the words had landed successfully. But silence has a delayed effect. It doesn't strike instantly. It waits. Days passed, and the moment returned unexpectedly. Not as noise, but as a question. Why didn't he respond? Why wasn't there anger? That unanswered curiosity began working quietly in their minds, replaying the scene without resolution. Words fade quickly because they exhaust themselves. Silence, however, remains intact. It doesn't weaken with repetition. Each time the memory resurfaced, Ali's quiet presence felt heavier. The insult grew smaller while the silence grew more demanding. The absence of a response removed justification. There was no angry retort to point to, no reaction to excuse the cruelty. All that remained was the original intent. Standing alone. Silence stripped away the comfort of mutual hostility. Some began to feel uneasy without understanding why. The laughter that once felt harmless now felt exposed. Silence has a way of isolating actions from context. It leaves people alone with their behavior, without distraction. Ali's quiet didn't chase them. It didn't accuse, it didn't return for revenge. That made it impossible to escape. There was nothing to argue against, nothing to defend. Silence offered no opponent, only reflection. Over time, the memory shifted. What once felt like confidence slowly felt careless. The silence kept asking the same question without words. What kind of person stays calm when humiliated publicly? And what kind of person needs to provoke that calm? The insult had been momentary. The silence became permanent. It followed them into later conversations, into interviews, into private thoughts. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, but persistent enough to never fully leave. Silence doesn't rush its lesson. It allows time to soften resistance. As Ali's legacy grew, his restraint gained context. The silence they once dismissed now carried meaning they couldn't ignore. Some began to realize that the silence wasn't empty. It was intentional. It was an absence of strength, but presence of discipline. That realization came slowly, often accompanied by discomfort. Without confrontation, there was no closure. Silence denied them the relief of resolution. The moment stayed open-ended, unfinished. That unfinished quality gave it longevity. Words could never achieve. The people involved aged, perspectives shifted. What once seemed trivial now felt significant. Silence aged well. It matured as understanding matured, revealing layers that weren't visible at first. Ali never revisited the moment publicly. He didn't remind them. He didn't use it as proof of superiority. That restraint ensured the silence remained pure, untainted by ego or explanation. Over time, the silence became a mirror. It reflected back not Ali's character but theirs, and mirrors are uncomfortable when they show things we'd rather forget. Some would later admit the moment stayed with them longer than expected, not because it was dramatic, but because it was unresolved. Silence doesn't allow easy forgetting. The insult had an expiration date. The silence didn't. It continued doing its work quietly, reshaping how that moment was remembered. The louder memory slowly lost its authority. What began as mockery ended as reflection. Not because Ali demanded it, but because silence demanded honesty. There was no escape from it. The silence outlived the insult because it carried no weakness. It required no defense. It simply existed, steady and unmovable, waiting for understanding to catch up. And long after the words were forgotten, Ali's silence remained, calm, dignified, and heavier than anything that had been said. Time has a way of rearranging memory. What once felt amusing slowly loses its shine. The laughter that echoed in that moment didn't age well. As years passed, the memory returned not as humor, but as discomfort. What was once brushed off as harmless began to feel heavier with perspective. At the time, laughter came easily because there were no consequences attached. It felt fleeting, insignificant, quickly replaced by the next headline. But time stretches moments, revealing what they truly were. Distance stripped away bravado, and left only intent. As Muhammad Ali's legacy deepened, the contrast became impossible to ignore. His image evolved from fighter to symbol, from champion to conscience. The memory of mocking him no longer aligned with the respect he commanded worldwide. That mismatch created unease. What once felt like confidence now felt careless. The laughter no longer sounded clever when replayed internally. It began to sound hollow. The absence of Ali's response returned to mind, not as relief, but as accusation. Guilt doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, often disguised as reflection. Those involved began revisiting the moment alone, away from cameras without the comfort of shared laughter. They realized something unsettling. Ali had given them dignity by refusing to retaliate. He had spared them public embarrassment by staying silent, and they had repaid that restraint with mockery. As they matured, so did their understanding of power. They began to see that Ali's silence wasn't weakness, but generosity. He had allowed them to walk away without humiliation, even though he held the upper hand. The laughter that once bonded them now isolated them. What had been shared humor became a private burden. Guilt tends to work that way. It separates you from the version of yourself you once defended. Some tried to justify the moment to themselves, others minimized it, but justifications grow thin with time. The memory kept returning, unchanged, waiting to be acknowledged honestly. Ali's continued grace made the guilt sharper. He never revisited the incident publicly. He never demanded apologies. That absence of confrontation left no outlet for release. Forgiveness that is never requested can be difficult to bear. It forces self-examination without the relief of resolution. Ali's silence denied them closure, and guilt filled that space instead. As years passed, their laughter felt out of place against the man Ali became. His patience, his humility, his dignity stood in quiet contrast to their behavior. That contrast was impossible to ignore. Some would later admit regret indirectly, carefully, without naming the moment outright. Guilt often hides behind vague reflections. It speaks softly but persistently. The memory became a reminder of a missed opportunity, not to win in exchange, but to act better. That realization arrived too late to change the past, but early enough to reshape understanding. Ali's restraint aged into wisdom. Their laughter aged into discomfort. Time made the difference clear. One choice endured, the other faded poorly. Guilt reframed the moment entirely. It was no longer about Ali being insulted. It was about them failing a test of character they didn't realize they were taking. The laughter that once felt harmless now felt exposed. Without Ali's reaction to balance it, their behavior stood alone. That loneliness is where guilt thrives. They came to understand that silence can be more condemning than anger. Ali never judged them, but time did, quietly and thoroughly. In reflection, they saw that Ali had shown them mercy they didn't deserve. And mercy, when recognized late, carries weight. It leaves a mark deeper than confrontation. What began as laughter ended as lesson, not because Ali forced it, but because time completed what silence had started. Guilt replaced laughter because dignity outlasts mockery, and the truth eventually catches up to every moment we once thought didn't matter. Strength had always been loud in the eyes of the world. It announced itself through dominance, through winning, through overpowering others in visible ways. Muhammad Ali himself was once the living symbol of that definition. So when he chose quiet over confrontation, it disrupted everything people thought they understood about power. That single decision forced a reconsideration of what strength actually looks like under pressure. Ali showed that power does not disappear when it is restrained. Instead, it concentrates, his silence didn't reduce his presence. It intensified it in a way noise never could. By refusing to react, Ali demonstrated that strength begins internally. It starts with knowing who you are before the world tries to tell you who to be. In that moment, he didn't protect his image, he protected his center. That distinction changed the meaning of control. People often believe strength is proven by response. Ali proved it can be proven by refusal. He refused to let disrespect dictate his behavior. He refused to let ego take the wheel. That refusal required more discipline than any verbal attack ever could. The quiet choice he made challenged generations of assumptions. It suggested that restraint is not weakness, but maturity. That real authority doesn't need to assert itself loudly. It simply stands firm and lets time do the explaining. Ali's silence became an alternative blueprint for power. It showed that strength can be calm without being passive, present without being reactive. That kind of strength unsettles people because it cannot be provoked or controlled. What made the moment endure was its simplicity. No speech, no explanation, no defense. Just a man choosing not to abandon himself under pressure. That simplicity made the lesson universal and timeless. Over time, people began to see that Ali's choice wasn't situational. It reflected a deeper evolution. He had moved beyond needing to win every exchange. He was no longer proving himself to others. He was living in alignment with himself. This redefinition of strength extended far beyond that moment. It reached anyone who had ever felt insulted, tested, or provoked. Ali showed them another option, one that preserved dignity without escalating conflict. The power of that choice lay in its patience. It trusted that truth does not need immediate defense, that respect earned through character lasts longer than respect demanded through force. Ali trusted time, and time proved him right. His quiet strength did something loud reactions never could. It forced observers to look inward, to question their own reflexes, to wonder whether reacting is always the strongest move. Ali didn't diminish himself by staying silent. He expanded the idea of what a strong man looks like. Someone who governs himself before trying to govern others, someone who remains steady when challenged publicly. That moment also showed that strength doesn't need validation. It doesn't ask to be recognized. It simply exists, consistent and grounded regardless of applause or criticism. As years passed, that choice became part of his legacy. Not as a footnote, but as a pillar. It stood alongside his victories, not beneath them, because character endures longer than achievement. People forgot the insult. They remembered the restraint. That alone says everything about the kind of strength Ali displayed. Loud moments fade, quiet ones echo. His silence taught that power is not about control over others, but control over self. That lesson reshaped how strength could be practiced in everyday life, far from arenas and cameras. Ali's choice gave permission to others to pause instead of react, to choose dignity over dominance, to realize that not every challenge requires engagement. The world often rewards noise, but it remembers integrity. Ali understood that deeply. He chose the path that would age well, even if it confused people at the time. Strength after that moment no longer belonged only to the aggressive or the fearless. It belonged to the disciplined, the aware, and the grounded. Ali helped make that shift visible. One quiet decision did what countless loud victories could not. It expanded the definition of strength. It softened it without weakening it. It humanized it without diminishing it. And long after the moment passed, that redefinition remained. Proof that the strongest thing a person can do is stay whole when everything around them is trying to pull them apart. In the end, nothing about that moment was ordinary. No fists were raised, no words were exchanged, no victory was declared. Yet something lasting was set in motion. Ali walked away unchanged, but the people who mocked him did not. Time carried his silence forward, letting it do what anger never could. It followed them into reflection, into maturity, into regret. Because when a man with every reason to strike back chooses restraint, he leaves behind more than a response. He leaves behind a lesson that keeps speaking long after the noise is gone.